Okay.
Hello everybody, welcome to this morning's Speakers for Schools virtual talk. We're delighted so many students from across our school network have been able to join us today. This session will last for around 45 minutes and will include a short speech from our speaker before we move to student submitted questions. Questions can be submitted by the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen, and this is open now. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all submitted questions. We anticipate several hundred being submitted, and there's simply not enough time to answer them all. I'm delighted to welcome this morning's speaker, Baroness Mary Goudie, live peer and campaigner. Baroness Goudie has kindly agreed to join us this morning to give us insights into her career, to talk about her passion for tackling social injustices, and to answer questions from our students. So please be sure to get them ready and to submit them as soon as possible. Mary, hi, welcome.
Hi, how are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. I hope everybody out there is well and have been able to get out in some fresh air in the last few days. It's really important just to go locally, but to get out and to be careful about social distancing. I don't think I need to emphasize that. I'm very pleased to come back to Speakers for Schools, which is an organisation that I have really loved since its inception nearly 10 years ago now. So hard to believe it's 10 years that we've been speaking to schools around the country, and so important. I'm very privileged to have been invited by Prime Minister Blair to join the House of Lords in 1998. But prior to that, I had worked in the NGO movement and had been the youngest councillor in the London Borough of Brent for 2 terms. That was better than any university degree. I was representing an area which at that time and in many other areas had the highest cot deaths, terrible housing, asthma caused by mice and other injustices where people were having to live. I believe that housing is a human right, and also that children should have the right to have space to be able to either do homework or to do their own projects at home, not to be all cramped in one room, as I know this still continues. But housing and the right to housing is very much a human right to be able to give people space. So from Brent, I then went to work for some very interesting NGOs, helped to find a housing association that amalgamated with another one that is working really well. But I think what you would want to know today is more about my work in the House of Lords. And in the House of Lords, I've been campaigning for issues in Northern Ireland because of the situation there, against FGM, for equal pay, which is really important. The right for agile working, which means partly working from home, partly working in the office or wherever you can work. Also to have the same rights as everybody, that women's rights are our rights, that we are 51% of the population, so we should have equal rights, and that in all government appointments, Prime Minister Cameron promised us that at least 50% chairs of public bodies would be women. I'm working and helped to found the 30% Club with Helena Morrissey and other friends to get at least 30% women on boards, and we're hoping to improve that now. And that's just not on FTSE 100 global companies, but also on the 350 and family firms. So this is all about equality. And equality in the workplace as well. And also the gender pay gap is right. Everybody should know what they're being paid sitting next to you, whether it's in an office, in a factory, out and being a gardener, doing architecture and so on. And also I've worked in lobbying the G20 and the G7 on their issues, in particular access to finance for women around the world. Also maternal health, which is really, really important, and the right of access to health for women. So I think I'll stop there and then we could ask questions. Is that okay?
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We've already had quite a few questions submitted here, which is fantastic. And just in response to your mention around agile working, how are you working at the moment? Are you working virtually, and how is that working in the Lords?
Thank you. Yes, it's a challenging time, and we can use this moment of time to change how we work, how our framework works. Since I've been in lockdown, I went into lockdown just about a week before it started. The House of Lords was just going down. We're now working virtually. We first started off with committees. So I'm on the House of Lords Social, Human Rights and Social Justice Committee and on the Finance Committee. And we've had 3.5 of those committees that's worked very well on Teams. The Labour Party, like all the other parties, has weekly group meetings, and we do that on Zoom. Then the House of Lords itself is working on Zoom, and that's really fantastic. The BBC is helping with that, so it's televised on television, and we're pushing with that to see the minister, because when you speak, you're just called in and you speak and then you call out. But it would be lovely to see the minister's reaction, or a few people's reaction to what you're having to say, but that doesn't matter. And we're also trying the app this week to see how we can vote. The House of Commons is now voting virtually, so we want to vote virtually. The other thing that is likely to happen in the next few weeks is that some members want a hybrid house so that they can go in. If you are to take distancing and walking around the Lords and so on, only 30 people would be able to sit in the chamber or be in the chamber. Also, walking in the corridors, you have to take care of the lifts. And I think myself, we are better, well, we do a hybrid house, but I think one is better to work virtually for safety for the time being. But I'm doing lots of Zoom meetings. I did a conference recently where there were 1,700 people, 96 countries. This week I did I have a blog, and normally I do a blog breakfast once a year in Washington. Wasn't able to do it, so we did it virtually. We had over 100 people from Italy, America, Australia, India, everywhere. We were amazed. We sent out 200 invitations, 150 accepted, and we had 100 on the day, normal fallout. So that's one of the issues. But I've been working virtually every day, whether it's on the phone, by blog, by whatever.
Fantastic, thank you. And so amazing to see that technology is allowing us to still engage with countries across the world and still push forward on such important issues as well. So we have more questions here. So one of our students, Rachel, has asked, how do you feel about representation in the House of Lords?
So representation, I mean, I believe in an appointed house. I know that some of my colleagues believe in a bicameral one, that there would be various people from different regions around the country. There are some who believe that we should have a voted house in. If we had a voted house, it would then bring into conflict, I think, with the House of Commons. How would you deal with the constituents? Who would be entitled to the constituents? How do we do the rules? Because at the moment, with constituents who come to us, if it's an immigration case, that goes back to the MP. If it's a housing case, goes back to the MP. If it's an industrial case, you can deal with that with the MP. There's sort of straight rules, like with councillors. Also, the funding would be quite different for an elected House of Lords. It's a huge constitutional issue. It's an issue that will, at some stage, come to force. But at the moment, I believe in the appointed House.
Fantastic, thank you. And Hayley asks, who or what is your inspiration?
So there's lots of people who are my inspiration. I have two great role models in life. Both are alive and both are in their 90s. One is Lady Jane Williams, who was Churchill's last secretary. She's well known for working on Churchill. She's holds prayer breakfasts. She has done a lot of work in prisons. She's politically very active. She's with it all the time. Her husband just recently died, and she spoke at his funeral she is amazing. In later life, she learned to read the classics because she felt she could keep up with her family for different reasons. My other great role model is Audrey Miller. Audrey has 2 children, Fiona and Gavin, both who are married and have families like my own. And she is her son-in-law is Alistair Campbell, who you all know of. But these 2 women I met when I was quite young. I was privileged to meet them, and I have been friends with them from the day we met. I sometimes bring them together because one lives in Chelsea and the other lives in Highgate. So these days it's difficult for us to come together, but both are active, both are out in the buses, both are with it. One's got a dog and so on, and they're into everything. So they give me great inspiration, and they want to know what's going on. Every time I have a call, what's happening? So plus there are a lot of other role models. My great friend, Ambassador Milan Verveer in America. She, I always feels for all of us, makes the agenda. She always knows what's the right agenda in London. I have a great friend, Helena Morrissey, who I knew before, but we founded the 30% Club together. Helena has a great way with words where I just say it out. Sometimes I'm too harsh, but you know, I learned that. So you learn from your friends. And then of course, there's a lot of male friends who I've worked with, who I admire greatly. And although I'm a Catholic, I am a great admirer of the Archbishop of Canterbury, who I have known for a very long time. His mother is Jane Williams, who I mentioned, but the way he has led this country, particularly during this pandemic, has been exceptional. He has really given great leadership to other church leaders. And I'm involved in an interfaith group, the Al Hibri Family Foundation, which is a Muslim family foundation, but works with interfaith, with Jewish, Catholic, and others. So these are things that matter just now to me, and they give us faith to keep going and keep others going.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. One of our students has asked, what sparked your passion for tackling social injustices? Was it something you noticed from a young age?
Yes, actually from when I was at school. I went to Catholic school, although my parents, we lived in Harrow. I went to a new couple of Catholic schools, like all the time happens, were being amalgamated into a new school. And at that school, on the edge, was Southall. And when I was in the 4th, 5th form, people were invited to come from the West Indies and other parts of the Commonwealth to help to build buses and other, because we didn't have people who were interested in those jobs then. And at my school, I found some girls were being discriminated against by other people. And my parents were Irish. We also learned about issues about no blacks, no Irish to apply, and so on. So my parents helped me to understand these injustices and how we fought these injustices, you know. And during the period when things were very difficult in Poland and Hungary, in the 60s, my parents worked very closely with the church, with families who came over and helped families to get rehoused and so on. So, you know, from an early age, and then my father, through his work, helped look after various families who needed support. So it's part of life, you know, that you must do this, you know.
Fantastic, thank you. We've had a lot of questions submitted here, which is absolutely fantastic. And one of our students has asked, what area are you the most passionate about in terms of equality?
Well, equality across the board, of course. So equality for women, equality for boys and girls. We must educate boys to understand the key issues of why you must treat children and women properly, why we must have gender pay, equal work. So the gender lens has to look through everything we do, whether it's the agricultural bill, whether it's the economy bill, when we look at the budget. And I've recently spoken on a women's what would a woman's foreign policy look like? And into that, one added, what would a woman's budget look like? So that when you've got women at the table, you see the gender lens appear. In the same way, when I've been working quite a lot and have recently been working on about women at the peace table, where we've had conflict, that you must have women and local women there, because they know about education, about health, what work needs doing, housing, and also that the schools have to be up and running. And when people come in to do this peace work, they take the schools over because it's the safest building, and the students are put in tents. This is wrong, So, women at the peace table, women everywhere, women at every table. There should be no meetings or anything without women there. And don't say there aren't there, because there are.
Fantastic, thank you. And another student here, Dre, has asked, if you could change anything in the world, what would it be?
Oh my goodness, that's I think that everybody has the right to say what, not to say, I think everybody should have the right to education, equal education. Everybody has a right to education, because every day a child misses education. I don't mean the present situation, but I mean every day a child does not have access to education. You cannot make it up. In the same way, every child should have access to proper nutrition, because we know that if a child isn't fed properly, it affects their brain. I've seen pictures, I can't show you, but I've got some pictures of a brain of a child, how it develops. And if it's not getting proper nutrition, it's going to affect their learning, it's going to affect their lungs, it's going to affect everything. In the same way that if you have babies born to young girls, that's why I believe in girls, not brides. As we know, in parts of the world, girls are married off. If a girl has a baby at 13, 14, the baby is not formed properly because the mother isn't formed properly, and the lungs and the heart can't function well. And in the end, the person doesn't live a long life. Neither do really.
Thank you for that. We have a question here from Bea who says, the theme of the Women of the World Day was the relationship between climate change and its impact on women in developing countries. What are your thoughts and targets that we could all get involved in to promote social equality in this country whilst considering climate justice at the same time?
Climate justice is absolutely vital. I would recommend a book that you might be able to get. It's short but really good, on climate justice, The Man-Made Problem with a Feminist Solution, written by Mary Robinson, the ex-president of Ireland, and who leads on climate change in the Elders. But we know that if we don't start doing justice around climate change, for example, sorry to come back to women again, but it's an issue, that 80% of agricultural workers are women, and women are having to walk further in parts of the world, in Kenya, where we get lots of things from, to get the water, because there's no mechanical watering there, or in other parts of the world. So we also have to, when that happens, women get raped, women get damaged, all sorts of things happen. But climate is absolutely important. We have to learn to use less water. We have to recycle water here. We have to use less electricity. We have to learn how to do things in a different way. We have to use less cars. And we're finding just now how we're managing to get around without cars, to take more trains, to take buses, and to have buses that, just on a local level, that the emissions are right. And I think in cities where people do not need cars, it's different if you're a large family or if you're disabled, but we should look at not having a car. And we certainly gave up having a car in London some years ago, as others. And as we know, in Paris, people don't have cars. Garages have turned into the underground garages. People are growing mushrooms and bean sprouts and things in them, as a commercial venture. But in cities and in Italy and other parts of the world, we need to have a good infrastructure transport system so that people do not need cars, and proper delivery services or pickup services.
Fantastic, thank you. And one of our students here has asked, what can young people do to help tackle social injustices?
I think raising them. Remember, young people are also part of civil society. So like with climate, young people can talk about recycling plastic and so on. With other social injustices, ensure that people are spoken to properly. If they're not, work out a way to that this can be changed. Looking and encouraging plays where you can spell out the messages through theatre, through music. That's a very good way, or television, of getting messaging over, through YouTube, through Facebook, getting rid of these people under the blankets who bring out such racial and anti-women and other sick stuff, that we need to be out there ourselves with good examples. Not having fights with people, physical fights, but raising the issues and trying to get a better society as a whole. You know, even the most basic thing on the train, standing up for a disabled person, or not taking the disabled seat on the train and the bus. That's part. But then at the same time, as one gets older, to look at better housing, proper education, everybody being entitled to use the health service, and accepting people who help us to treat them well. And also, I feel now that we knew that people were not paid well, but when you look at what the first responders are being paid in this country, we should also be pressing for better pay for first responders, for nurses, firemen, ambulance people, and so on, you know, because they are paid really low level salary compared to others.
Fantastic, thank you. And Ellie has asked, what has been the highlight of your career so far?
Oh, that's very hard. I suppose I think being empowered to go to the House of Lords by Prime Minister Blair, and that empowerment has given me the opportunity to work not only for the United Kingdom and to raise issues, but also to work with groups of people globally, where I probably, through working in the NGO movement and being working on my own little company, would have done okay, but having this empowerment gives you the empowerment to make change. And that's what it's given me. And from that day, I have continued to thank and to make change. I feel very strongly about that. And even during this period, which is very difficult, I'm putting down questions, getting answers, and drawing the government to put out there what we're doing. The government is putting large amounts of money into Gavi, which is the vaccine global group, and we're also putting more money into UNICEF and to other charities globally on the front line to try to help, because if we don't help globally, we're going to be breeding more terrorism. So it's important to not only have funding at home, but also to work with other global countries to try and solve problems there, including this pandemic. Otherwise, it's never going to go away.
Absolutely. Another question here from Kamal is, what is the hardest thing about your job?
Time. I try so hard to time it, and then time. I wish the day, well, I don't wish the days to be longer, but I think time and toxic people. I try my hardest to not let toxic people stop me. I just go walk up. Sometimes you used to let them get you down, but I've now known to just go away, you know, just let them get on with their thing, you know. The great phrase was, really, should you be doing that? Yes, I should.
Fantastic. And one of our students has asked if you might be able to tell us a little bit more about the 30% Club.
Yes, thank you. We founded the 30% Club just a bit before Speakers for Schools, because when Speakers for Schools was launched, we launched it at BY Mellon, and the 30% Club at that time wanted to launch something to do with schools, and Speakers from Schools came up at the right opportunity. So that was great. It's not an NGO, it's a campaign. It's a campaign to get more women on boards, and not only just on the top boards, but for women coming up through the whole C-suite and so on of companies. Also to get more MBAs for women. So we have a number of the business schools around the world who have given free MBAs. People have to apply, and there's a competition, but we have that in nearly all the countries. We also decided to have an international link. So we have 12 to 13 chapters now, and they are in the G20 countries because they can influence their government to ensure that these issues are live in their countries, and also keeping it on the international stage as well as the G20, the G7, ASEAN, and all of those groupings that come together, and we get opportunities to speak. We're also now being invited to be members of the OECD, which is tremendous for us as a global campaign, and also to be members of the Women Economic Forum. And recently we were invited to be members of the UN, women's part of the UN. Further, we have a new, well, not so new, a new global chairman, which is great, in Anne Carnes, who is the vice president of MasterCard. And Anne has brought a lot to the table, and so that every country now has its own chairman and its own steering committee. And we're trying at the moment, we've got a strategy to make that more joined up, because we're always joining up. And the campaign is going well, but we're very cross that the British government decided not to put down they cancelled the gender pay reporting and the number of women on boards just before the virus. So we're pushing hard, and I've put a lot of questions down to try to get the date. Regardless of this pandemic, we should be knowing where we're going, because companies' boards and other boards are all meeting virtually because it is good governance, and governance has said they have to meet. So, but we also have a web page, and please look at it. It's www.30% Club, and you'll see it there. Lots of questions and answers on it as well.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We'll be sure to share.
We have a mentoring. We also set up a mentoring scheme, which is really important, which is a cross mentoring. So it's not your company, so people don't know what's upsetting you. It's cross mentoring, so it's from company to company, and it's run by an organisation which we help, again, like you, to fund Women Ahead with Liz Dimmock.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll be sure to share a link.
Yes, and they do work with schools as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll share a link to the website in the Q&A thread as well. Yeah, thank you very much. So everyone can access that, which is great. One of our students here, in relation to your work with 30% Club, has asked, what are some of the barriers to women joining boards?
Oh, they are still difficult. They were much, when we started 10 years ago, the great phrase, there isn't anybody out there, you know, there's no women qualified. Well, let me tell you, even then, and even more so now, we have more women lawyers, more women accountants, more women engineers, structural engineers as engineers. We've got more women academics. All of those have a place on a board. Why should a retail company have 100% men when it is women around the world that make the decisions about every penny that is spent, including cars? And Nissan now does have a number of women on boards, and particularly in the Americas. But, you know, there was a time where in Drax, the big energy company, one of them, had no women on boards, you know. So this is the issue. Women do understand these issues, and women should be on boards. Also, a lot of education had to be done with headhunters and search firms, because they, again, were going around with the same lists, and we had to persuade them that there were really good people out there. And you only get experience if you're on a board, so you can't say there's nobody experienced. We'll give them experience by putting them there, you know. And the other thing we need to start looking at is job share too, and that's a big returners, and job shares will be different when we come out of this pandemic, but we must work out a way how that can continue or get better.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a question that's been asked here, which is, did you go to university, and if so, what did you study?
I didn't go to university. I went to college, and I studied secretarial and admin and other languages. So I went to equivalent of a technical college, you know, because at those days it was either that or university, you know. So I chose that route, which and for my parents it was right, you know.
Fantastic, thank you.
But I have also been to the University of the World, if I must say, you know. But I really do feel that higher education, whether it's as an apprentice, whether it's at university or a technical college, is important long term. Even sometimes if you leave it a few years and you go onto it, because sometimes experience is good, further education both socially and everything else is important, including the Open University.
Fantastic, thank you. Imogen asks, what is it like campaigning and advising on the world stage? You mentioned the G7 and the G20, so can you give students a bit of an insight into your work there?
Well, you have to do it with other people. So you do it with groupings together. So when we were working, and it was President Obama who was, at the time we were a year ahead of that. We knew what the agendas were because you know that from the foreign, like our Foreign Office, the equivalent governments have what are called Sherpas working on these issues all the time. And we were able to find out that one of the crucial issues that we were very worried about was access to finance for women. At that time, the World Bank had also worked an app that could go on phones and had been approved, and Hillary Clinton and Cherie Blair used that to get publicity for it, so that women in parts of the world where they were cycling and doing crazy things to transfer money to their parents, to pay things, to get money to their children, to find out, to get an appointment for the doctor, to find out results, they were able to use those apps. And so arising out of that, on the whole question of access to finance, we had to ensure that women could get access to finance where there's no banks. And in this country, it's changed now, but about 15 years ago, a lot of pressure was put on banks to open small branches where there was housing estates or no banks or so on. So access to finance is vital, whether it's for a mortgage, whether it's to put your money in, because some people who you see in the markets in Kenya and places are taking that money home, taking it home and putting it under the mattress. That's not, and then getting robbed. So access to finance is not just finance itself, but it's a bank to put the money in, somewhere safe. So that was working with a whole grouping of people, with Vital Voices, with governments, and economists, the World Bank, and so on. So to make these changes, you have to work with groups as a whole and get a spokesperson within the groups, and then to keep moving it along. And also knocking on your own government's door or local authorities, and they'll keep saying no, but you have to keep coming back, not taking no for an answer.
Absolutely, I think that's great advice, not taking no for an answer.
So there is just one thing on the G20. There is an organisation called the W20, which works with companies and women, so that you have a silo into the G20 and the G. All of these organisations feed in, but you have to make sure it's happening. You know, check the agendas, but it's all working with people.
Fantastic, thank you. One of our students here has asked, what impact do you think COVID-19 will have on women's rights?
Well, that's a very important issue, and coming out of this issue, we have known that it's been women around the world on the front line dealing with COVID-19, whether it's as doctors, nurses, carers, keeping the home going, doing part of the homework, etc. So we're seeing women emerging as effective and compassionate leaders. We have seen in New Zealand, in Germany, and in Holland, and in Belgium to an extent, although it was really difficult. We have seen where you have women leaders, that there's huge change. We've seen with Christine Lagarde in the way that she's managed to handle finance and keep some calmness. We've seen with women leaders in the European Commission, where 50% of the commissioners are women representing countries. So I see that women coming out of this, we have a lot to do, but we have to keep women at the front of it, and women's jobs must not be lost, as sometimes can happen when people come out of a form of war, or this pandemic is a war. It's the first biggest thing we've ever had since the war of since the Second World War, although there's been many so-called wars after that. So we have to ensure that women's jobs are not lost, and women have to ensure their jobs are not lost.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question here that's been submitted by one of our students is, what can be done about period poverty and women's access to sanitary products?
Well, that's really, really important. We've seen here that in most schools, products are available. We've seen that on the refugee camps, and we've seen in food banks that not only are period things available, sanitary towels and other things that people need, painkillers are available, but also nappies for babies and baby products. They're quite different, but they do go hand in hand, and it's really important that these should be free by right, because it's part of our bodies. It's like getting prescriptions for asthma, for thyroid, or for heart conditions or blood pressure. This is not. These are an issue. This is something that happens day in and day out for women for 25, 30 or longer in their lives. In the same way, women should also look at ads like the Eva peel and so on to look for symptoms for cancer and not ignore them, especially, bleeding and bleeding at the wrong time and so on. Really important that these issues are discussed.
Thank you. One of our students here has asked, how do you stay motivated to make change and to keep pushing forward?
You keep getting messages, you get emails, you have to do all the reading, of course. You have to have energy, I think. Energy, you need energy. You need people to energize you, and you have to have energy. And you have to believe in what you're doing. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then you can't do it. It's like doing when you choose certain subjects that you have a choice to do as a student, then you choose those because they give you energy, and that's what you feel you want to do for the future. So these issues that I work on will ensure, I hope, that we will have a better future, like climate justice, social justice in our own country, around prisons, around schools, around Tampax, all these issues are social justice, and we have to make changes around that.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think it's very clear that you are so passionate about the work that you do, which is absolutely fantastic. And do you have any advice for our students who might not know what they're passionate about yet, or how can they kind of work out what it is that they want to work on or focus on, and how can they make those decisions for their future?
I think you have to look around where you are in a small way to see what small injustices there are, coming back to the plastics and to the recycling, and to just making sure rubbish is where it should be. That's, the environment is important, because the environment where we are matters. And if the environment is clean and tidy, people feel happier than if they see rubbish thrown around. Then on the bigger issues, it's watching the news, not just watching the BBC, but maybe there's different channels now, looking at Sky sometimes, looking at Al Jazeera, looking at Channel 4, looking at all the different newses that are on the web, and through those you'll see the issues of the day. You may not be happy about the way those issues are both local and national, and also to look at global news. If you looked at American newspapers, there's nothing global in them. Well, if you look at our newspapers, you're seeing about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Yemen, what's happening in the Congo, what's happening about kidnapping still in Nigeria, and at the same time we see what's happening in France around the drought for some of the wine crops. So we at least have global news, and that's where you really wake up, I feel, by looking at the global news and then bringing it back home. So you have to look at issues that you like.
Fantastic. I think that's great advice, and something that our audience can start to kind of do now whilst they're likely studying from home, or if they're in school a few days a week. And unfortunately, that is all we have time for this morning, but a huge thank you for joining us. We had a lot of questions submitted, which is fantastic. But I'm not sure we were going to be able to get through all of them, but we will collate those and send them over to you so you can see the other questions that students had as well, if that's okay.
That's positive. That's absolutely fantastic.
That's wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's a real pleasure.
And thank you for inviting me as well. I really loved it. Thank you.
Of course. A short announcement for students. We have shared a feedback form in the Q&A thread, and it'd be fantastic if you could complete this. We also shared a link to the 30% Club website as well. And the colour for today's activity sheet, if you're completing that for your teachers, is Clementine, and we'll share that in the Q&A thread as well. Please be sure to look out for future virtual talks. And Mary, thank you again for joining us. It was a real pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you all again later this week.
And Lily and Carly, it was lovely to be with you as always. We'll talk soon. All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Do I press BG to get out?